Hello, Gumantashan here with a review for Rush Hour, the TV series, Episode 7. So, after last week's admittedly weak episode, how was this one? Surprisingly, a lot better. I'm actually really surprised. I was hoping, after last week, because I really didn't like giving that negative review, I was hoping this was going to be at least alright. And it wasn't just alright, it was great. The story of this episode, I don't spoil it, but it's actually, I really liked it. Mainly because it focused very heavily on detective work. You had Lee and Carter going about with their different intuitions, or their intuitions pulling them in different directions on what they wanted to do, and, who's right, who's wrong, and a little competition between them. It starts off talking about, stopping a heist, and it's like, oh, wow. It's actually really, really interesting. When I say there's a focus on detective work, I'm not even joking. Like, a lot of this episode focuses on the detective work. There's still action and stuff in it, and this has a good balance of that with the action, with with the character moments, with the with the actual casework that they're doing. That they stumble upon what looks to be what Lee thinks is a part of a conspiracy, and what Carter thinks is just a simple crime. It's interesting, and of course it's always great to see Lee and Carter, banter back and forth with each other over, okay, is this really complicated or is it not? And then just bickering back and forth as they continue on their investigation. This episode surprised me. It really did. Like, the plot, and when I was watching it, and I started off in the first half of it, I'm like, it's pretty good. And then finished out the episode, I'm like, wow, I really liked that episode. So that is a much welcome surprise after last week's mediocre episode. This episode also really made me laugh. And Gerald, I have decided that Gerald is probably the funniest character, and I think, I was thinking about this while I was watching the episode. It's the actor. I don't know the actor's name, but he is hilarious. That guy, for what I expected to be just a bit character, ended up being a consistent character, and I'm glad. The comedic timing from this guy is just great. He's making really stupid lines sometimes. I mean, he's a kind of a stupid character at points, there to do something completely illogical just because it's funny. But he seems to be a walking rule of funny. Like, he walked into the police station and stole someone's phone, and he's just acting like, what do you expect me to do? And Carter's just sitting there like, some of the funniest moments in this came from Gerald, and that is the funniest thing. We also, it's a bit of a comedic and a bit of a character moment. I had mentioned before that it's hinted that Dee Dee kind of has a thing for Lee, and it is so funny, him living in her house. It's like, if that wasn't enough, Carter wanted to know if he was on for dinner with Dee Dee, and she's just like, as long as you bring Lee, no dinner. And I'm like, wow. Honestly, I'm seriously just waiting for something to happen. There's actually this one moment where, because Carter kept mispronouncing a Chinese, the Quantao gang, he keeps mispronouncing it. But then he's rattling off these Russian names without any trouble, and Lee's just like, how can you pronounce those but not Quantao? And that wasn't the funny part. The funny part was when he looks to Dee Dee and he's just like, look, I said something funny. I'm just waiting for there to be something between them, because at this point, it's like they keep dropping all these little hints that there's something too. There's something that's gonna go on, and I'm just like, man, do something already. But of course, Lee's still focused on finding his sister, so he's still running on the B plot. But I'm actually really hoping something between them happens at some point in the series, because I just really like the idea of that. The action, I have to say, they're pulling out new tricks. Of course, there's the overused slow motion. I think at this point that's pretty much a given. I will holler and shout when they stop doing it, but they continue to do it. But, okay, first off, let me get another negative out of the way. First, okay, I know why they did it. They used wire work in a scene, and this involved Lee being way high up and jumping. So John Fu was up in these, rafters, jumping from rafter to rafter, which obviously can be pretty dangerous. So he was obviously on wires. You know what I'm getting at here. Some bad wire work. And I don't know, maybe that was just the only decent take, but there's one part where there's only one time. I mean, you can notice that he's wearing a harness. They edited it out, obviously, so you don't see any wires, but, there's this one part where he jumps, and you can tell when he's getting his balance, he's moved forward in a way that he would be falling over, and then he just kind of slides back, and you can tell, oh, it's wires. I'm like, and that was a little disappointing. While I do believe that if they had stopped with all the editing, all the slow motion stuff, and I mean, I don't so much mind the multiple angle cuts where they'll like do a cut through the screen and you'll see action in this part and then another action on this part. I don't really mind that so much, especially when Lee and Carter are both in a fight, like they are in this episode, but they're in different parts, so you can't see them in a single scene. So you see both the action at points, and I don't mind that, really. It's a stylistic choice, and it seems to be something that the show wants to use, so I'm not really going to complain about that. What I am going to complain about... No, I'm not going to complain about this. I was going to say slow motion, but I already said that. They actually sped up some of the action, and it's not as bad as slow motion, because it's actually moving it faster. And I told you before that, slow motion really focuses on the action. And if there's a mistake, a fault, or an awkward face or a pose, it makes it more obvious and makes it look worse than it is. The speeding up actually does the opposite. The only difference being is that it's still kind of, despite the fact that it does, it doesn't make a mistake pop out. If I had to choose between both, I'd rather them not do it. I'd rather them just, the people who are editing this, just stop messing around with the fight scenes. But if I had to choose between them speeding up or slowing it down, I'd rather them speed it up. Because some of the moves looked a lot better sped up. Grabbing a guy and flipping him around. I actually did like that. Mainly, maybe I'm just desperate for anything that's not slow motion at this point, but hey, I'll take what I can get. I have to say though, from the character perspective, Gerald has really grown on me. When we were first introduced to him in the pilot, and he's basically just Carter's cousin, and he's in the place of the guy in the movie who's wearing the red suit. I was just sitting there, I'm like, he's just Carter's cousin. Because that character in the movie never appeared again. He was not relevant past that part. And, but Gerald has been I believe he's been in every single episode, and I am glad, even if he just walks in out of nowhere, and Carter's just like, what the hell are you doing here? And then he says something stupid and leaves. He's funny. He is, I think, probably the funniest character. I said this before, but I think he is probably the funniest character. And that actor, I think, honestly, I hadn't really appreciated him up until this point, but he's actually doing quite a good job in the comedy department. He really is. It's kind of funny, though, because I don't know why I hadn't thought about it, because I always laugh at when he comes on. but he's just really enjoyable. The rest of the acting's pretty much the same. John Fu continues his sarcasm, except he seems to be playing Lee at some points a little more jovial. The main instance is what I mentioned with Dee Dee and him snarking at Carter, and then he turns to Dee Dee like, look what I did. I said something funny to Carter. And, well, I thought that was funny because I don't know if I'd said this before, but I kind of feel like sometimes he's a bit too serious. He's a bit more Jet Li than Jackie Chan. But, I'm hoping that he's growing into that, Because, I don't want them to completely change him, to make him really, really funny and goofy, but he's doing good in that. I still like Lee, and of course, this is a slightly different interpretation of Lee, and they're getting the main points right, really. So I can't really complain, and I'm really, given the low expectations I had going into this show at the beginning, I really can't complain all that much. Overall, this episode was great. Honestly, I'm surprised. I was hoping for something that was just going to be at least a decent episode, made, with alright writing, some good action, good comedy, and this episode kind of went above and beyond. It was almost like they realized that the last episode 6 was weak, and they're just like, man, we make episode better just to make people, just to make up for it. And it does make up for it in quite a big way. It more than makes up for it, honestly. And another thing I forgot to mention before is that we're actually getting drops of the plot. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this before, how a lot of shows that follow an episodic structure that aren't, a continuous story will have a bunch of episodic, every single episode will be episodic, most of them, except for the plot relevant episodes, and you usually get them every few episodes, mostly in the premiere, the middle, and then the finale. And maybe some more depending on how much plot they're putting into the main show overall. And then in the episodic ones, it'll sprinkle a little bit of plot here and there. Like in Burn Notice, when Michael does whatever job he's doing in that episode, and then you see in some scenes he's working on trying to find out why he was burned and who did it to him. And then it'll show him getting some information from an informant or putting something together or figuring something out. And, overall, it's not the biggest part, but it's still moving the plot forward. And they did that with this. And it's not a whole lot. And it's good that, they didn't shove it in, in the middle of the episode. And they didn't just tack it on. It's one of those nice little parts where it's and it kind of moves you back from the perspective of Lee and Carter. And it's just hey, we still have our plot going on. So I like that. So yeah, this episode was, honestly, I really enjoyed it. It had a good story, and I think I forgot to mention this, but it actually did have some good character moments between Lee and Carter, learning the lesson of who ended up being wrong in the scenario, because it's kind of funny because it does play with your expectations on who's going to be right and who's going to be wrong, but a nice little character moment. And I do like the fact that in a lot of episodes, it ends up being Lee, Carter, Dee Dee, and Gerald sitting at a table eating dinner. And I actually kind of like this. It's been sort of a recurring thing among numerous episodes where it's just them talking. Gerald's doing something goofy. Lee and Carter are going back at each other, or they'll be and a lot of times these are when you'll have their character moments and they'll say what's probably the theme or the main lesson of the episode. And I do like that they're doing that, and that's something that kind of surprised me. It's really not something that the movies did, well, especially since they're movies, they're not a TV show. I do like the fact that they're actually taking some time to say, yeah, Lee and Carter, they can learn stuff, and they and I did like there's some one parts near the end of the episode where it was just a whole segment of Lee and Carter just talking to each other, And it was just, and after all the action and all the hullabaloo of the case at the end of the episode, it's nice just to see them talk to each other and, you know, open up a little bit and, you know, talk to each other about why, you know, they were so insistent on their own ideas being right. And man, I love that character development. And yeah, we're getting character development, honestly. It's great. It's not as heavy as one of the earlier episodes, but it's still there. And honestly, I have to say, more than a number of the other episodes, this episode felt really balanced. You had plot, you had humor, you had action, and it would kind of like move between them. And by the end, I think that's the best thing I can say about this episode. It felt really satisfying. The plot was, you know, it tied itself up. You know, it dropped us a little bit more of the, you know, overall plot. It made us laugh. It had some good action scenes, if, you know, continuing the wacky editing. But overall, this episode was really good. And I do, like, if you haven't started watching this show, I actually would recommend it. I do, at this point, I strongly recommend it. Opinion may change in the future. It's always possible. It's happened with numerous shows I've watched that I really liked. But, you know, at this point, I like to be optimistic about how the show's going to go. So yeah, this one gets a thumbs up from me. So, yeah, thank you for watching, and tune in next week when I review episode 8 for Rush Hour.